Every leader at every level needs to be thinking more strategically. But it's hard to find the time to think about thinking. So we're making the time. Hey leader, David Burkus here, organizational psychologist and author of 4 best-selling books on helping leaders and teams do their best work ever. And one of the things I hear from a lot of leaders and a lot of teams is how often they feel like they just have to react. There is a new fire to put out every single day. There is a new emergency to focus on every single day. And that limits individual teams and certainly individual leaders' ability to think strategically about the work their team needs to be doing, why it's so important, and perhaps more importantly, how they can do it best. So in this episode, we're gonna talk about how to think more strategically in a way that's gonna help you without requiring all that much time, and also may help you find a bit more time between each reaction to be more strategic. And we'll do that by asking 5 relatively simple questions. The first question to ask to think more strategically as a leader is, what are our real priorities? What is actually a priority? You know, as we said in the intro, so many teams and so many leaders feel like firefighters, feel like they're constantly moving from one incredible earth-shattering emergency to the next one. They feel like they are succumb to the tyranny of urgency. And it takes smart leaders to step back and go, wait a minute, what are the real priorities? What are the critical things our team is tasked with that we cannot allow to get overlooked in all of this other urgent stuff? I'm a big fan of the framework popularized by Stephen Covey of the urgent and important matrix. In other words, smart leaders and great teams know to ask themselves on a regular basis what is truly urgent and what is important, instead of reacting to what's urgent but not important, or what's important but not actually urgent, so they can allot their time accordingly. We want to ask, what are the real priorities? And we want to ask often if they have shifted, because often when teams are doing great work, new work gets added to the team, and it may or may not shift the priorities. Most often, it doesn't, and we need to establish that our priorities haven't changed. We're still going to focus on the urgent and important, and this non-important new thing or non-urgent new thing is just going to have to wait. The second question to ask to think more strategically as a leader and to help your team think more strategically is, what does success look like? In other words, we have identified the urgent and important tasks, but have we identified exactly how we want them to be executed? Not just, done, but specific done. What metrics? Done under what budget or in what time frame? Or done while respecting what rules? I'm a big fan of a term in the military referred to as commander's intent. When planning any military mission, leaders often take the time to set commander's intent. In other words, a clear and vivid picture of what a successful mission looks like, instead of saying what you're going to do at every step of the way. Now, you do want to help your team figure out what the steps of execution are, what the right order to execute those steps is, but more importantly, you want to make it clear that they know what success looks like. Because life happens, work happens, situations change. And as we find in the battlefield, often when the situation on the ground changes, individual leaders and individual military members need to know commander's intent so they can pivot their plan accordingly. Well, every team needs to know very clearly what success looks like so that when the situation changes, they can change their approach and still fulfill what success looks like. The third question to ask to think more strategically as a leader is, what obstacles will we face? What obstacles will we face ahead of time? We want to begin to anticipate what our obstacles are and make a plan for how to overcome them. Now, in past episodes, I often talk about how much I believe that failure is feedback, but the best feedback happens without having to actually fail. It comes from considering what things would cause us to fail. The tool I'm talking about here to think more strategically is often referred to as a pre-mortem. Many teams, many organizations do a post-mortem after a project to draw lessons from it, but a few great teams and great leaders do a pre-mortem, ahead of executing the task. When we know what success looks like and we're beginning to figure out what our plan is, let's think about all of the different things that could kill our plan, that could derail our project and cause us to fail. And then let's put systems in place to where we either prevent that thing from happening altogether or where we know exactly how to react if that obstacle does in fact pop up. Failure is feedback, but pondering failure ahead of time can give you feed forward that keeps your team moving forward. The fourth question to ask to think more strategically is, what resources do we need? Just like the obstacles question, we want to be thinking about this ahead of time. We want to be thinking about what resources we need to make the case to acquire, and we want to be planning maybe when we get said resources. We don't want to get ourselves in a situation where the project is taking longer than expected and we end up having to go fight for additional resources, even though we've shown no real progress, no tangible movement towards success. Instead, we want to think about those things ahead of time. And a word here, resources is more than just time and money. In fact, the biggest resource on a team is work hours, is how much capacity our team has to take on that specific project that we're thinking more strategically about. We may need to find a way to offload some capacity on other projects that aren't urgent or aren't important. We may need to find that we have to add additional team members. The hours that our team executes on this project are just important as resources like time and money or access to computer systems, etc. We want to think about all of the possible resources ahead of time on what we need and make a plan to be able to access those resources and maybe even extend those resources if we run into some of the obstacles we anticipated and made a plan for. The fifth and final question to ask to think more strategically is, who else do we need? Who do we need to consult? Who do we need to have on our team? Who needs to be a part of this project, which involves thinking at a broader level than just how we're going to execute on this project. You know, often in the moment when we're reacting to all sorts of things and we're just trying to figure out who on our existing team is going to do what, how we're going to execute on what life and work is throwing at us, we don't take the time to step back and realize that often the answer to a lot of our questions is to ask who, not how. Yes, I stole this from Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy's brilliant book titled Who, Not How. But they point to an amazing flaw in our thinking, which is often we think that we need to learn how to do something, how to do a certain task, etc., instead of thinking ahead of time about who in terms of what allies do we need on our path to success. You know your real priorities, you know what success looks like, you know the resources, you know the obstacles that you're going to face, but the last thing you need to consider are what other allies you need in order to execute properly. And allies come in two forms here. Allies can be internal to the organization, what other departments, what support staff, etc., are going to help you execute on this new strategy. Allies are also external. It may be another company, it may be a way in which you partner with your end user or your customer. There are a variety of different ways people who don't draw a paycheck from the same place as you can still help you successfully execute on your project. But you're never going to tap into either category unless you take the time to ask, who else do we need to execute on our how? Ideally, you would get in the habit of asking all 5 of these questions ahead of a project. And ideally, as you get better, these questions are going to take less and less time. But if you just focus in on the first question first, you'll find that you have saved yourself a lot of time. Yes, teams are tasked with doing a variety of different projects, but great teams know to focus on the ones that are urgent and important and use the time saved to think more strategically about how they are going to excel in that task. So start at the start thinking about urgent and important and let the other questions flow from there. It shouldn't take too much time, but it's going to save you a ton of time. And it's going to increase your team's chances of reaching the success you described when you answer, what does success look like? It's going to increase your chances of pleasing all of the other who's that are helping you execute on your how, and it's going to increase the chances that you're leading a team of people who are truly able to do their best work ever. Oh, and one more thing. Thinking more strategically is also thinking more creatively. And so you may need to change up certain things about your leadership style to push the level of thinking on your team into one that's more creative. In which case, you're going to want to check out this video here on how to lead a creative team. Or even a team that's not all that creative, but needs to think more creatively. You can start by creating some time to watch this video.